What up, it's Prime Pete, and my apologies for not uploading a video in a while. I went on a really long vacation, but it was fun, and now we're back and ready to hop into another hot topic. There is something underlying in almost every discussion we have about modern AAA multiplayer games, and this is much less covered and acknowledged by most content creators, and I think it's undoubtedly one of the most important questions that we have to be asking regarding the future of games. A lot of discussions right now regarding modern gaming involves talking about skill-based matchmaking and its implications in all forms of play, casual and competitive. Engagement-optimized matchmaking, which is the new system that's taking over AAA gaming by storm, and even weird manipulations of in-game factors that we see in modern shooters like Call of Duty, Apex Legends, and Overwatch. The biggest question that is underlying within all these debates is this: when do player matchups become legitimately unfair? That is, when putting players of varying skill levels together, what amount of difference in their skill is large enough to warrant calling it an unfair matchup? Better yet, are any matchups truly unfair if one player or team is just simply better than another? Is manipulating gameplay and using systems to change the outcome of a match due to one player being better than another at all justified? That's multiple questions, so I'll combine them and form the most important question of all. When do player matchups become legitimately unfair, if at all? And this, my friends, is the greatest debate to ever happen in the history of online competition. This issue is especially potent in 2023 due to the insane backlash that Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 got. Ever since then, people have been waking up to the manipulations of skill-based and engagement-optimized matchmaking. But I digress. If you want to skip the explanation and just skip to my strongest argument, skip to the timestamp on the screen. But I recommend you listen to the explanation so you get an idea of what I'm trying to talk about. That being said, here we go. To start, there are definitely a couple of areas where we as human beings can simply say that something is an unfair matchup. For example, a pro CSGO player going in a 1v1 against someone on their first day of ever playing the game. Though an extreme example, this proves that we can usually tell a matchup has a predictable and expected outcome if it's obvious enough. Another good example is also pitting a professional team against an elementary school team. The pros are highly skilled and deserve the win because of their dedication and mastery, but putting them against a team of preteens is not a true test of skill for them. Let me ask you this: how would you make these two situations actually justifiable or fair, so to speak? Well, most people would say to add a handicap to the team or player with the advantage. For example, forcing the pro CSGO player to aim with their offhand and only use the Desert Eagle, or for the professional soccer team to play on their knees. This would certainly make it easier for the lesser skilled opponents to have a chance at victory. But this begs a very important question. How do you define fairness? Well, Merriam-Webster, if Google wasn't good enough for you, defines it as operating in a manner that is honest or impartial or that conforms to rules. Let's take a look at the first part. Honest or impartial. Impartial, for those of you who don't know, means not favoring either side. You're not trying to assist one side more than the other. In the second part, we see in a way that conforms to rules, or simply following all the rules the game has put in place. So if we revisit the definition, it's operating in a way that is honest, that doesn't favor either side, and that conforms to all the rules of the game. So handicapping the advantageous team doesn't actually make the game fair. It makes it unfair, because these handicaps fully favor the opposite team and diminish the abilities that the clearly better team possesses. And right now you're saying, but Pete, you're totally wrong. The competition is completely unfair because we clearly and easily know the outcome if there are no handicaps in place. And that we do, but because either team is operating with the same facilities, in the case of a CSGO matchup of a noob and an absolute pro, they both have gaming computers, 2 arms, access to the same guns, play on the same map, and they have the same health and movement speed. Or regarding the soccer teams, they both have 11 players, and most importantly, abide by the same rules. So by technicality and definition, these matchups are actually fair, but they are unbalanced. And this is what we as human beings are actually skilled at detecting. There is an obvious expected outcome in both scenarios. This calls attention to the big difference between the fairness and balance of a matchup, because unless one team is given a handicap or has an advantage that gives them an upper hand that the other team doesn't have, the fight is actually fair in all aspects. The playing field is not artificially tilted towards one party or another. The only thing that does this is the absurd difference between their skill levels. Another good way to look at this: take the best player in a certain sport or game. For example, LeBron James or Michael Jordan. If LeBron or MJ were constantly matched up against other LeBrons and MJs of very close to equal skill, would they ever have stood out as the best? Of course not, because they would never be in an environment where they could excel. And again, the whole point of being great at something is to excel. And for some reason, this has been a hot topic of debate. I've heard and seen people trying to justify shady systems and straight up manipulation just to give people a leg up when they haven't worked for it. Now, luckily for these elementary school soccer players and the brand new CSGO player, these matchups will never legitimately happen. Why? Well, obviously there are certain divisions and leagues to separate these teams and place them somewhere where their skills are put to the test, and actually balanced test, that is. A professional team in the Premier League will never face off against an elementary school, just like a global elite will never face off off against a silver. But this begs the question, does balancing matter in activities where your skill is not directly correlated with who you're matched up against? For example, a casual playlist or a simple pickup game of soccer. If a professional shows up to either activity, they will surely dominate their competition. It will be very unbalanced. But again, it is a fair matchup because they're operating according to the same rules as everyone else. They're just far better at the game. See, fortunately for athletes, professionals will never pull up to your pickup games, or even your league games. But unfortunately for gamers, we operate on the World Wide Web, which means that if you queue up into a playlist that has no filtering and no skill-based matchmaking whatsoever, you could easily end up with the best player in the world if they so choose to queue up for the same playlist as you. That's why games nowadays have implemented some sort of lobby balancing, some sort of skill-based matchmaking, and that I can't blame them for. It's to avoid absolute blowouts for certain matchups. However, skill-based matchmaking has become stronger and stronger as the years go on, because companies are experimenting with heightening their player retention, not making games more fair. And while I can't necessarily blame them for wanting to raise player retention, it does raise some very interesting questions. Namely, how far is too far when it comes to balancing? I mean, after all, you should still be rewarded for being good at a game. That is the point of being good at something. Take it from the perspective of a game that is single player, like Elden Ring, Zelda, Tomb Raider, heck, Super Mario. The better you are at these games, the better you will perform above the average player, because the game stays the same for everybody. There are no manipulations of anything about the player's experience, unless of course you're playing a game where you can choose the difficulty of your campaign. Think about how annoying it would be if single player games scaled their difficulty proportionally to how good you were. While it may become more engaging and require more effort and ultimately challenge the player more, the player will never be able to excel and stand out. Think about how annoying this would be in speedrunning or boss battles. Imagine every time you fought Bowser in Mario, or any boss in a game like Dark Souls or Elden Ring. They just increasingly got more difficult to defeat just because you were getting better at defeating them. The whole point of having skill in a game is to be able to perform at a higher level than average, within the same rules and parameters as 100% of other players. And most people will completely overlook or pass this up. You might say, well, if you're better at a particular game, why would you want to play at the same difficulty as someone who is average? Isn't it boring? Isn't it unfair? And the same can be said for multiplayer titles at a far larger degree than single player titles. If you're better than average at this game, why do you want to be matched up against players who could be worse than you? Couldn't it be boring? Wouldn't it be unfair? And unfortunately, in modern gaming, this very question has seen the answer of very heavy skill-based matchmaking. But the truth that a lot of players do not want to address is that actually, yes, we do want to be placed in lobbies against everyone else, or at least a far larger scope than only people of very similar skill. And unfortunately, for a lot of people that are still defending Activision and Call of Duty, we look mean and inhumane for simply wanting to outperform our potentially inferior opponents. I mean, after all, right after having fun, the objective of every multiplayer competitive game at its very core is to outperform your opponent. In a game of team deathmatch, for example, you win by outperforming the other team in your ability to kill them. If you're on top of the leaderboard, you outperform your teammates. I won't delve too far into politics in my videos, but this system of EOMM, the system of everyone should get the same result regardless of skill, talent, or time investment, just to make sure everyone plays more, is borderline, if not outright, socialism. And that might ruffle some feathers, and you can be mad at me for pulling the politics card in a game. But arguing for everyone to have the same outcome and sympathizing with worse players about how annoying it is to get killed by a way better player is being seen as philanthropic when it should be seen as unjustified and unfair to the people who put in the work to actually improve. There's no doubt that we should be rewarded for our skill in competition through means of outperforming our opponents and achieving victory. But the biggest question remains, how far is too far? Well, let me ask you this, gamers and athletes alike, when have you ever considered quitting your sport or your favorite game just because you got destroyed once or twice by someone far better than you? Personally, as an avid soccer player and a lover of video games, I have never considered quitting my favorite sport for this reason, and neither have I considered quitting my favorite video games for this reason. Why? Because soccer is a fantastic sport in my opinion. I will not ever quit a game I find extremely entertaining just because I'm beaten from time to time. When you play a game, you're signing up for losing just as much as you're signing up for winning. I find it very difficult to understand why losing, winning, and performance need to be actively manipulated by gaming companies just to retain players, when all of their players should understand that by signing up to play a game, you're signing up for the wins, losses, good performances, and bad performances, and you're accepting that all of those things are going to happen when you play. Catering to the weak mindset of being a quitter just because you have a bad game or two is a step in the wrong direction for these companies. Better yet, the real reason people will quit a game isn't isn't even necessarily because they're losing. It's because the game generally lacks quality and entertainment value. When the game is quality and fun enough, quitting is never an option because you'll be giving up something you love doing for a very petty reason. The reason players are quitting a game or would perpetually quit a game in the future is not because they get killed by a sweaty player. It's because the game is not quality or fun enough to keep them engaged regardless. In modern games where engagement optimized matchmaking is a crutch for player retention, losing is incredibly boring and painful, and winning is not rewarding enough either. High-end AAA graphics hide games that are rigged, boring, and incomplete, and we as a community need to see through it. In conclusion, companies are making a very bold assumption. They are assuming that if bad players are getting outperformed by good players, they will quit. But the point of being good at something is to be able to outperform people who are not as good as you are. And some of the gaming community find that to be a tough pill to swallow. But if someone is a true fan of your franchise and your game has fun and enticing gameplay at its core, players will never want to quit because the game, in and of itself, is enough to keep everyone engaged. And if you have an extremely weak mindset and you quit when you're beaten, maybe video games just aren't for you because this is what they've always been. Nowadays, being a good player in a video game comes with vast consequences because not only are you forced to try very hard in most of your games to win, you also never get to experience the true diversity of the player base, which does eliminate a certain social aspect of gaming. Different demographics of players will never ever be paired up against one another. And this is just my opinion, but the reason Modern Warfare 2 feels like the skill-based matchmaking is so heavy is because Activision is trying extremely hard to keep everyone happy so they don't quit, because the core gameplay is just not fun. And personally, it's the most boring COD I have ever played. If we take a game like Titanfall or Titanfall 2, which in my opinion are one of the best movement shooters and most fun games I've ever played, I never cared if someone destroyed me, and I was a pretty serious player at the time. But since the game's mechanics were unique, fun, and engaging, I could enjoy myself for hours on end. And at the end of the day, competitive multiplayer games are meant to be fun, and right below that, they're made with the intention for players to try their best at outperforming their opponents. And this is how competition will always be. What are your thoughts on this debate? Let me know in the comments. But for now, that's all I got. Take it easy.